He ultimately decided at the end of the week that it's going to be Texas and Georgia, in his opinion, in the SEC title game, much to the chagrin of Bama Nation. But I looked at it and I thought to myself, that's not necessarily how it could play out. Those are just the teams with the fewest question marks. Hello and welcome. It is always college football. Today is Thursday, July 18th, and we are coming to you from Dallas, Texas, the site of SEC Media Days 2024. It's been a lot of fun. We're going to kind of put the hay in the barn, if you will, talk a little bit about what we saw today. If you're here with us via the ESPN YouTube channel, please hit that thumbs up button. If you're here with us via the podcast, you can like, rate, subscribe, all that great stuff. Look, I like media days. I do. I'd be lying if I feel super organized about the amount of information I've consumed over the last 4 days. There have been moments, at least in the last couple hours, where I'm like, hang on a second. Which coach was it that said they really like their depth? Was that LSU? Was that Tennessee? Which coach was it that said this is the deepest team we've had? Was that Florida? So it's been a little bit challenging. It felt, to at least an extent, like we've been drinking water out of a fire hose, but it's been a lot of fun. So what we're going to do today to kind of help organize things, because it's really probably helping us as much as it is helping y'all, going back through some of the highlights of media days and trying to interpret whether the coach is using coach speak or if he's actually speaking the truth, because we know this. And Coach Saban actually said it on the set, really, I think it was Monday, when he went out and he said, yep, I really just used the media to speak to my team. So that's what they're all trying to do, reach their team by way of the media. So without much further ado, let's dive in and put a bow on what's been a terrific 4 days here in Dallas, Texas. Well, he did retire, and the world has changed. But the guy that stole the show at SEC Media Days the last 4 days was Coach Nick Saban. And to share the set with him in that environment has been really, really fun. I got to be honest, man. I have not spent that much time with him consecutively in a casual setting in about 15 years. So to be able to interact with Coach, and for people, I think, that have always seen him a certain way, when he steps up to the podium, when he goes up to the microphone, he has an agenda. He has a point that he wants to get across. And that still very much comes through in his time on camera breaking down these teams. We know that. But what I don't think a lot of people knew was just how funny he is and how he likes to just kind of prank you all the time. Like, he wore me out all week long, which to me is a good thing. He killed me a couple times, calling me soft on Wednesday night show, telling me that I was, I thought I should call the plays on Monday's show or on Wednesday's show when I was up there alongside Nick Saban and Kalen DeBoer. But the good news is when he's ripping you, that's his love language. Like, he loves you if he's ripping you, and it's directly related. Like, the more he rips you, the more he loves you. So I felt great about it, but it was really a lot of fun to be with him. And to be honest with you, as someone that's now done this for 11 years, I've done this a while, being able to listen to him and how he evaluates these teams is incredible. And to hear him kind of looking at, let's just say Alabama, for example, looking at them through the lens of a coach and him being able to articulate that and being honest and without, caring about people's feelings and saying, here's how I evaluate the Georgia Bulldogs or the Florida Gators or the Ole Miss Rebels or the Alabama Crimson Tide. That was amazing. And one thing I did not think about, I knew this, but I've never thought about it. All these coaches think about is not where they're good, not where they're elite. They don't think about their good qualities on their roster. They think about the qualities on their roster that can potentially get them beat. And I noticed this when Nick Saban was sitting up there interviewing Kalen DeBoer, sitting there interviewing Steve Sarkisian, and the first question, and really the only question that he wanted to get answered when visiting with those two coaches was, hey, coach, what's keeping you up at night? Where are you concerned? So these coaches all look at this thing through the lens and the perspective of, okay, this can get me beat. how do we alleviate those concerns? They're not sitting there thinking to themselves like, man, I got a great wide receiver. This is the best. They're thinking about the left tackle that could be a problem if they don't block the defensive end that's on the pass rush. So that was an interesting perspective as well. And he ultimately decided at the end of the week that it's going to be Texas and Georgia, in his opinion, in the SEC title game, much to the chagrin of Bama Nation. But I looked at it and I thought to myself, that's not necessarily how it could play out. Those are just the teams with the fewest question marks. So he's looking at it in a risk-averse way of trying to predict what might happen in the SEC season. I'll take the teams that feel like they have the most questions answered. So that was fascinating as well. But he's the king of media days and was wonderful on the set all week long, and we'll continue to get great perspective from him throughout the football season on ESPN's College Game Day, and I'm sure a bunch of different avenues as well. So, Coobs, let's kick it off. Let's dive in. Coach speak or truth on Alabama?
Well, we have to start with Nick Saban, okay? We have to start there because you were on set with him when he said this about Texas.
That's always the challenge in the SEC. You know, what kind of tickles me is all these people asking these questions about how Texas always ran the conference they were in. They're not going to run the SEC. There's a whole lot of arrogant people in a lot of places in the SEC, so they can forget all about that. They'll be a good team and a great program, and Sark will do a great job, but that's not going to be a problem.
All right, so great stuff, but is that the truth or is that coach speak from Nick Saban?
It is the truth, because I think the one thing that has made the SEC unique is that pie in the Southeastern Conference office there in Birmingham, Alabama, has always been split 12 teams for a long time. Then it became 14 teams. Now it's become 16 teams. But every single piece in that pie is equal in size. It's no secret that when you look at the SEC logo, there's not one behind me right now, but you look at the SEC logo, every single banner of those schools is the exact same size, and none are really prominently in the spots that they're in. You almost always look at the teams and they're in alphabetical order, frankly. So they are very, very thoughtful as it relates to making sure that everybody is treated equally and everybody's voice within the room is heard. So I think he's 100% right in saying that Texas is not going to just come in, throw their weight around, and start making demands. That ain't going to happen because you got 15 other people that feel just as good about where they're at in the SEC landscape as the Texas Longhorns.
All right, we're moving on to the Georgia Bulldogs. Coach Smart came out and said that, he said this the other day.
We're dealing with new challenges this year. We don't have a chip on our shoulder in terms of people trying to use that as motivation. I've never used a failure from the previous year as motivation, and I've never used the success of a previous year as motivation. We won't do that this year. That's not who we are. We want to recreate ourselves, to say, in the best light we can. And this team has been fun to coach. I tell people all the time, we had 15 really tough spring practices, and that includes the spring game. I probably would only trade one of those in and say, could I do it over? That we got a lot out of those. I enjoy being on the grass with this group. They're fun to be with, have a great locker room. They love each other, and they're working their butt off right now.
All right, so coach speak or truth that Georgia is not playing with a chip on their shoulder this year?
Coach speak, 100%. And I found that so interesting. Quote, I've never used a failure from a previous year as motivation or a success from the previous year as motivation. That is impossible. Human nature, granted, not everybody, but those that are high achievers, human nature is that you will use whatever motivational tactics that you need in order to elevate yourself. Georgia came up short in the biggest game that they played last year. It would be impossible not for that game to be in the back of both Coach Kirby Smart's mind and his players' mind. When asked about the Bama game, Carson Beck was visibly shaking with anger and rage. So it's absolutely coach speak, and he can tell you all he wants to. Tons of respect for Coach Smart. I've known him forever. yes, we're just focused on trying to become the best team that we can become. But you know what's going to help get them there faster? Thinking about their shortcomings from last year and how they can improve.
All right, next one comes from Missouri head coach Elijah Drinkwitz. Well, listen to what he had to say.
And it really is not about anybody else except our own internal drive and expectations to be the very best that we can be. And so we don't rely on exterior noise and exterior factors to provide our motivation. We're motivated every day with, again, always compete mindset, developing an elite edge, which is energy, details, grit, and emotional consistency with how we train, how we prepare each day in order for us to play our best game on Saturday.
All right, this coming from the same guy who dressed as Darth Vader, came out with a lightsaber, made some comments last year. So I'm going to ask you, is that coach speak or truth from Coach Drink?
Coach speak, big time. And it's because even running over to Josh Heupel at the end of the year or end of the game and saying we stand on business, like he is very much one that is aware of what's being said about his program. And I think that program last year in particular really galvanized them that they weren't really at the top of everyone's mind when thinking about the SEC rankings last year. I think they were picked 5th in the media polls while we were at media days last year in Nashville. So I don't recall exactly where they were, but I think they were 5th in the SEC East or thereabouts. So I think he's 100% a coach that would use any tactic necessary to get his players to play with a little bit more of an edge. So yeah, I think that's 100% coach speak.
All right, speaking of rankings, Shane Beamer had this to say the other day.
In closing, I'll say this. I really, really, really like our football team going into 2024. Most of you don't. That's okay. When you guys do your picks on Thursday, we'll be picked 14th, 15th, or 16th, I'm sure. But I'm excited about this group.
All right, I feel like this is a little bit of both, but you tell me, is this coach speak or truth from Shane Beamer?
It is truth. The reality is a lot of people look at the South Carolina Gamecocks and they think about where they were problematic last year, particularly along the line of scrimmage offensively. And they look at the fact that Spencer Rattler just got drafted into the NFL and they're like, man, they don't have enough. They don't have enough guys to be able to make life difficult for the teams that they'll face. And the reality is they probably will be picked 14th, 15th, or 16th. Vanderbilt will probably be 16th. Then you probably have some combination of Arkansas, some combination of South Carolina. I mean, I don't know, Mississippi State. Like those 4 teams will probably be the teams that are ranked 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th. What I would say is that in visiting with people that are very familiar with what South Carolina has, I think they're going to be better than people realize. I think defensively, they have a chance to be really good. Now, really good is relative. I don't think they're going to be a top 2 or 3 defense in the league, but I think they'll be in the top half, which is going to probably allow them to win more games than people are anticipating. And if their offense develops into the offensive identity that I think they're going to develop into, ground and pound, run the football, use Lenora Sellers, run him around and create with his legs. If that's the direction they end up going offensively, that's going to shrink the game and only improve their defense. So I think South Carolina is being slept on, but at the same time, I personally can't put them in front of teams like Auburn, in front of teams like LSU, Oklahoma. All those teams to me are better than the South Carolina Gamecocks.
All right, we'll pick it up now with Brian Kelly, who kicked things off on Monday, which must seem like forever ago to you.
Clearly, being the number 1 offense in the country was not good enough. I think you have to have much more balance. So the balance that we need is offensively and defensively, we've got to be able to complement each other. And we didn't do that last year. So what we're going to need is that complement on defense. We're going to have to play better defense this year. And I think we've made the necessary strides in the offseason to continue on that growth.
All right, McElroy, coach speak or truth from Brian Kelly?
I think it's truth, and there's no denying they're going to score points. I think Garrett Nussmeier, by season's end, we're going to be talking about him as one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC. I look at their receiver core. Gone are 2 first-round picks. Everyone knows that that's really, really tough thing to replace. Yeah, but it's LSU. They're going to be just fine at wide receiver. Kyron Lacey and others will step right into those spots, and the production likely won't drop off at those positions. Offensive line will be excellent. But it's 100% true that the only thing that killed them last year was their defense. I mean, how many teams, it's almost difficult to do. How many teams can have 600-plus yards of offense and score 49 points and lose? That's really hard to do. So I look at what LSU was last year, and there's really only one direction to go on defense, and that's up. I love the hire that they've made with Blake Baker. I think his hire will better take advantage of the athleticism that the roster has, all three levels defensively, and I think they'll create some havoc, which will ultimately lead to turnovers, which might allow them more possessions offensively. So I think LSU has taken strides on defense. I just wonder if they have the depth necessary to kind of stand the test of time throughout the season, because you're likely going to get beat up in the conference.
All right, moving on to what feels like, strangely, the forgotten team at SEC Media Days. Billy Napier came out and said this the other day.
I like our team, and I believe in our team. And when people ask me why, it's about experience. It's about production. We got 463 starts on this team, 17 starters returning. We've got 41,000 snaps coming back this year. We're fourth in our league in returning production. And we've got competitive depth for the first time.
All right, all those were truths, and there were stats, but is that more coach speak that he believes that this team can take the next step, or is that a truth?
I think it's a truth. And a lot of the conclusions that have been made about Florida, everyone always starts their analysis on the schedule. It's like, my goodness, how about we talk about what they have on their roster? Because their roster's really good. I know Ricky Pearsall's gone, but they have Eugene Wilson, for example. So there are good pieces that are not there, but there also are young pieces that played a lot and had a ton of growing pains in the last couple of years that are now poised to take over a role in their defense or offense, and they should be much better as a result. So I think they're still going to be able to run the football. The way Billy operates his offense, they're always going to be able to run the football, but it's defensively where they really need to take some strides. And I think all the young players that got thrust in probably a little early last year will be more equipped to play competitive and consistent football against better competition. So I told someone the other day, I think if you told me Florida's over-under win total is 4.5, if you were to tell me what's more likely, Florida wins 7 or 4, I'd take 7. I think they're going to be that much better than people think, and I think a lot of the games that people think are impossible are very winnable. They're the Florida Gators. They have good personnel, and they're going to find a way to make games really competitive, just like they did last year against Missouri at the end of the year, and Missouri needed a 4th and 17 to win that game at home. So I think they're going to be a problem.
All right, moving on to the team that Coach Saban said will not just come in and dominate this league. Steve Sarkisian came out and said this.
For us to be able to sit here and say this is the deepest team we've had, probably the most talented team we've had in my 4 years here, I can unequivocally say that.
That's a bold statement. Coach speak or truth?
I think that's a little coach speak. But that has a lot to do with how much I liked last year's roster. Now, the pieces that they've added in the portal, I think are excellent. I think they have adequately filled the void of the 3 wide receivers that really carried them throughout the season last year. I think their 1-2 punch at running back is excellent. Offensive line should be great, and I think they have depth at that position. They have great depth at quarterback, naturally, with Arch Manning backing up Quinn Ewers, who's a Heisman Trophy contender. My biggest issue is on the defensive side, and I know that they lost 2 massive pieces on the interior. They also lost Jalen Ford, their middle linebacker, so they lost really good players defensively. They went to the portal and got some guys, but I think it's going to be more quantity-based than it could be quality-based as far as those positions are concerned. So I don't think they're going to be bad defensively. They'll be good. They have good personnel. But I just wonder if they're going to be as good on the top end at certain positions defensively as they were throughout last year's season.
All right, when you talk Texas, you got to talk Oklahoma. Speaking of personnel, Brent Venables came out and said this.
Again, you're not going to sneak up anywhere, any week in any venue and show up and luck up and win. And so it's a conference. It's about earning what you get. And I think going through it, a season, you'll figure that out. You'll figure out what was good, what wasn't good, what the areas of your program, your roster that need improvement, so that you can match up and have an opportunity to compete for championships.
All right. Kind of an interesting comment there by Venables. Coach speak or truth?
Truth. And we've seen Oklahoma in the past. We've seen them play in playoff settings. And those rosters, granted several years ago, were not competitive enough in the trenches to compete with teams like Georgia, Bama, LSU, what have you. So I think that they have done their best to try to get bigger, stouter, more physical in the trenches defensively. But you don't know if you've done it until you've actually gone through the test that is the season. So I think there's a possibility that they come in and they're great. But there also is a possibility that there's a learning curve and they get exposed a time or two along the line of scrimmage because they have a lot of athleticism defensively, but are they bulky enough to hold up against teams that want to impose their will on the ground and kind of try to take over the game from a physical standpoint? So I think it's 100% accurate. You don't really know what you got until you go try to test yourself against the best, and they're going to have that opportunity with the schedule they have to play.
All right, Lane Kiffin came out and was asked a question about culture with all the transfer portal players that they've taken over the past 2 years. He starts it by talking about the transfer portal and his team 2 years ago.
I don't think that we had a phenomenal culture, which is my responsibility as the head coach, to weather when that Alabama game went bad and then all of a sudden fall off. And I think that's a portal issue, just like it is in sometimes in professional it's a heavy free agency issue. They haven't been there long. In college, they didn't really initially pick them. NFL is different because they got picked. So they didn't initially pick them. So maybe now, why are they going to the places they're going? So a lot goes into that. And I think last year we got some really good breaks in the games too. But that was a really good culture last year of players that were there for the right reasons.
All right, so Coach Kiffin talking about culture. Coach speak or truth?
Truth. That is as true a statement as I've heard so far in all the different pieces of audio that we've listened to. That is so accurate because there is a little bit of an issue when you rely as heavily on the portal as Lane Kiffin does. You might get more experience by going to the portal. You might ultimately get more talented players in certain spots and players that are more physically mature because they're 21 years old, as opposed to the freshman that you would take out of high school who is maybe slightly undersized. But what you get by leaning into the freshman recruiting class and the high school recruiting class is you get buy-in and you get guys that understand how things work in your building. And when things don't go well, they're going to come closer because they really love the place that they're at. If you're going to a place because of what you're getting in NIL, or you're going to a place because, let's be real, you're making a lot of money, you might not be as willing when things get difficult to stick together, come together, and just pull your way out of an adverse situation. So I think it's a delicate balance. And it really just depends on the individuals. And Lane has been open about, hey, we try to do as much as we can in finding out the background of these guys. Are they guys that we want to bring in? Or are they guys that probably best maybe going elsewhere? That's a challenge. But getting all these guys that are coming in for just 1 year to buy in completely to what you're trying to do is difficult. And I think that Lane did a great job last year, but every year when you're turning the roster over like this and you're going to portal to fortify your needs, it's going to be harder and harder to continue to create the culture that naturally exists. It's something that really has to be worked on. And I'm not sure Lane has found the balance, but we're going to find out this year because the expectations are real.
All right. And speaking of expectations, Coach DeBoer came in and said this.
The way they respect each other, you could see it in spring ball. And as much as I try to do a great job of laying out the tempos of practice and how we need to be aggressive and play the game the way it needs to be played, but also, hey, we got to protect each other. We need each other. I know I needed to say those things, and I wanted to say those things, and it's important to me. But I think they understood that. And that's, again, a credit to Coach Saban and everyone that's coached in the program before, and the culture that existed even before I got here. But these guys, they know they need each other to reach the goals that we have as a program.
All right, so speaking on culture again, is this coach speak or truth?
This is truth, 100%. And I think that he's kind of describing there how you kind of organize practice. So basically, for example, when you're going and he's talking about playing the tempos that you need to play in practice and practicing the right way, not getting guys hurt, not going to the ground, not taking an unnecessary cheap shot against your teammate. Like, those things happen, by the way, in spring ball because you're just fed up with going against each other. Like, you don't want to hurt your buddies naturally, but he's talking a little bit about just the way they practice. And I think that's a really, really important aspect of building a good team, practicing the right way. And that's going to improve development as well. And that's something that Coach Saban always emphasized. Like, don't tackle to the ground, thud up, hit each other, but don't do anything unnecessary that could put your teammate at risk. So I think he's talking too a little bit about the importance in the 12-team playoff era and the possibility that all these teams might, if they go the distance, they might have to play 17 games. So if you lose a guy in practice, if you lose a guy in the games, that's to be expected. That happens. Like, guys get hurt. That's part of the game. This is a sport where, unfortunately, there is a 100% chance of injury at some point if you play it long enough. But if you're losing guys in practice because you're not practicing the right way, that could be even more detrimental now, knowing that you might have to play 2 more games than you had to play in the 4-team era. So that's, I think, what he's kind of expounding upon there. But even in a deeper layer of that, too, he's talking about the guys really playing for each other. And Coach Saban referenced this multiple times on the set. And this was something that was created for the last 17 years. When you're at Alabama or when you're at Georgia, when you're at Ohio State, when you're playing for championships, the teams that win championships, they're playing for their school, they're playing for their family, they're playing for the name on the back, the name on the front. Like, all those great things are real. That's true. But you're also playing because I want to help the guy next to me reach his potential. I want my wide receivers to be great. Like, I'm playing for them as hard as I possibly can. And if I don't give 100% effort as a receiver blocking on the perimeter, then guess what? The guy that I whiff on the block might make the tackle, and maybe my running back loses 2 yards as opposed to gaining 7. So you're playing as hard for your team and your school. You're playing just as hard for each other because you want to have your buddies back. So I think that's also what he's referencing too, if you want to go a layer deeper. Before we put a bow on today's show, thought there was one piece of gold from Kirby Smart when referencing Star Wars and Coach Saban.
It's weird. I mean, the call I did to set up for this media days was like, I was like nervous. I was like, for 15 minutes, I'm going to share with him about my team. I'm like, I feel like I'm giving answers to Darth Vader or something. So it's very different.
I mean, it would be kind of strange, like forever. And sure, would they bounce stuff off of each other? Naturally. They're going head to head on the recruiting trail like for the last 7, 8, 9 years, however long Kirby's been there, since 2016. Every single thing that Kirby's done in building his program is to gain an advantage against the guy that he's about to give all his secrets to about his roster this upcoming year. So I can see where that would be a little strange for Kirby, but I think that was strange for everybody. I don't think Coach Saban told me a thing until like my 3rd year at ESPN. So it's the way it goes. It's all in good fun, though, and it was a great media day. It was. And I'll say this about the current state of the SEC. It's really neat to see 2 teams in Texas and Oklahoma joining the league, and they just feel so right. Like, they really feel right, whether it's Sark coming in and just holding court with a great understanding and the familiarity of the league. But it was also really refreshing to see Venables, who knows the league well, also having played against teams in national championship games and otherwise, it just feels like those are just such appropriate fits. They feel like they are so ingrained in the culture of the SEC, so that will be a seamless transition. And there's a lot of buzz and excitement here in Dallas-Fort Worth area for the SEC and this part of the country becoming SEC country. So that's been really neat. Another thing that I think was great about SEC Media Days, Nick Saban, being able to listen to him and hear from him on how he evaluates these teams, what he's thinking about as it relates to the portal, how he would use the portal, what he thinks of the expanded college football playoff, the priorities that he would have changed in his own locker room in preparing for a 17-game regular season. I mean, all that stuff was fascinating. So if you didn't get to see all of it, don't worry. There's going to be plenty of opportunities between now and the end of the year to hear Coach Saban's take on where the world's going and how he would operate in this new world of college football. And then finally, the thing that's most interesting about where we're going is that all these coaches have an idea. They all are looking at this and they kind of think this is how the world's going to work here in the 12-team playoff era. Like, these teams are going to do this, and the conference championship game is going to be weighted like this, and this is how many teams should get in from the SEC. This is how many teams should get in from the Big Ten. Like, everyone has kind of an idea of how this is going to go, but they all qualify it by saying, yeah, I really don't know how this is all going to work out. Like, I really don't know what adjustments to my roster I would make, because I've never done it before. And it's going to be just a fascinating year to assess how teams prepare for the season, how teams try to navigate the season. And in most cases, because everyone's schedule has gotten more challenging with the additions of new teams and abandoning divisions, everyone's schedule in the entire country has gotten more difficult. How do you navigate through that schedule? And then how do you respond to the adversity that is inevitable? Because Nick Saban said this about Georgia. Georgia's lost 2 games in the last 3 years, right? Well, they were both in the SEC championship game, so they had a lot of time to recover from that disappointment before they had to tee it up again. Well, when you lose a game in the regular season, you have about 24 hours before you're on to the next game. So that's going to be different for a lot of teams that are not familiar with tasting failures. It'll be fascinating. I can't wait to see it. That'll do it for us here from Dallas, Texas for SEC Media Days. I'm Greg McElroy. Continue to like, rate, and subscribe to the show wherever you get it. We appreciate you guys so much. We appreciate Coobs and Jack and all the work they did putting together the sound today, because it was really fun to listen to these coaches kind of just read between the lines if we can. So for all of us here at Always College Football, we hope you have a terrific week and weekend. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.